most of you probably know him or at least have heard of him. Neil Osborne is a Medford resident, and he's an attorney and has been involved with the local chapter of the NAACP, and now we are thrilled and honored that he is the Diversity Director for the City of Medford. And we invited him to come because we wanted to have the important conversation about race and ethnicity and diversity and inclusion and how that fits in with us living in Medford. And so we thought Neil would be somebody that would be not only knowledgeable about that, but also be able to help answer any questions and foster some conversation. So please welcome Neil. Thank you.
Laura, thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you to all of you at MCC. I am honored that you would even ask me to present to you. And Laura was kind enough to give me enough advance notice, so this has been on my calendar for about a couple of months, and it keeps sitting there, and I'm trying to think about, okay, what can I say, what can I do, what can I present that's interesting? And sure enough, I waited till the last moment, but hopefully you will find what I will share interesting enough. I've provided a couple of handouts just to give a little bit of context to the history of the position, and also try and frame how the stars got aligned in a certain way that I am actually standing before you as the Director of Diversity for the City of Medford. And I do remember about 3 years ago when MCC was beginning to form. It was back at a time when I was inflicted with the disease of thinking that I wanted to serve the community by holding a public elected office. So anywhere there was a crowd, I was going to be. And it was a snowy February storm morning where we gathered to plan and grow into what I can see is a wonderful nonprofit organization for the city that helps actually do what I want to accomplish as a diversity and inclusion director. It is about how we talk to each other and become a closer, tighter community. All right, now with that beginning, some of you, I know a lot of you in the room, some of you have seen me present before. I'm sure it will be no surprise that I like to be succinct. I am a lawyer, but I am not used to these long presentations, but we'll see how it goes. I think I'm better in a question and answer period, so I'll try and present something, hopefully of interest, and then I will shut up and sit down, and then we'll both sit down, but do some questions. I think it's part of my law school training. One of my professors always indicated to me is, if you're a lawyer and you're arguing before a judge, and you've laid out your argument, and the judge indicates that they agree with you, shut up and sit down. And I've sort of always carried that with me. Once I've convinced the person of my position, sum it up, only bad things happen if you continue talking. I would like to share with you that I am an immigrant. Many of you know that I was not born in this country. I am in the United States. I am in Medford against my will. At 5 years old, my parents packed me, my two older brothers up from England, and we moved to Medford, Massachusetts. I begin my presentation about that because I want to frame who I am within Medford and to share how my past will influence my future. When I hear talk about DACA children in this country, I am so drawn to those individuals. I feel heartache and pain at their anxiety because, for the most part, but for my parents coming in 1969, having some wherewithal to begin the process, I would be a DACA person. That the place that I know well, more than my birthplace, is the United States of America. And there are individuals brought by their parents, just like I was, and they sit in limbo. And it hurts my heart for those individuals still to be like that. So I am sympathetic to their plight because I see myself. So there is a piece of paper which I keep in my important documents. It is a citizenship paper, which indicates back in February of 1976 that I had the right to remain in the United States as a citizen. My parents had to go through the process. They had to take the exam and pass the exam. And also my oldest brother, Leonard, who was 13 when he arrived here, he had to also pass that exam. But I was younger, and my older brother, Brian, who's the middle child, we didn't have to take the exam. Once my parents, my older brother took that exam, we were automatically granted citizenship. So a piece of paper separates me from a right to remain in this country, and I hold that dear. It's important, and it frames who I am. I also want to share with you a little bit of Medford's history and about the position of Director of Diversity and Inclusion. And I sort of want to try and tell two stories. I'll see how successful I am when I get to the end. I want to tell what was happening in Medford and what was happening in a young African-American man in that time. There was one event that I think was critical to me being here in this position, and it was not a pleasant event. It was a disturbing event. It took place back in 1977, and it was a fight, a riot, a racial altercation at the high school. I had to do a bit of research because I wanted to go back and sort of see what historical documents were out there and sort of revisit again what it felt like to be in that moment. And I was able to find a Boston Globe article back in October of 1977. Now I would have printed it out for everyone, but you have to go to the Boston Public Library. There's a process. If you have a membership card, you can get old prints of old articles. And at the bottom it says, don't reproduce without permission. I think, okay, an attorney, I'm an officer of the court, I won't intentionally violate that. But what I will do is sort of share with you some of the content of this particular reporter's reporting on the event. And I'll also share with you, I came to the Medford Public Library, sort of tried to do my research, went through the local paper in all of 1977 trying to find it. And the only thing I saw in the local paper was an after-the-fact article that the high school was reconvening a 20-year-old committee to try and address racial issues at the school. It listed a couple of individuals who I looked up to in the West Medford community. They were a few years older than I was. They were going to be a part of this committee. It listed a couple of teachers who were football coaches. So I was beginning to recall how it felt to be a young man in this situation. So in 1977, I am in junior high school. I'm not yet in the high school, and I know this event has taken place. I have an older brother in the high school, and I know people in the community. So the name of the article is "Someone is Called a Name and the School Erupts." The article, the reporter states that there was an African-American gentleman at the high school who had walked up to a door of a classroom, and he was glaring at a white individual, classmate inside the classroom, and he mouths to him, and I'm not going to say the word, I'm going to make the choice not to say the word in public, but it was a word that was derogatory for gay men. And after that event, this individual didn't really care for that comment to be directed at him. Days later, went out or came back to school to try and find this individual again and confront him. he was able to find the individual where other black students hung out, and an assault began, and that is how the 1977 racial, some call it near riot, event took place. But what happened was individuals who knew each other began to back each other up. And when I say back each other up, it means as a teenager, growing up in Medford, it was important for me to find close friends who would go out of their way to help me or you out. Being a part of athletics back then was an important part of my growing up because it knitted individuals together in a common cause. What I find striking about the events back in 1977, the individuals who were involved in this altercation didn't typically belong to sports teams, because there's a certain bond that you create amongst each other when you're working out, you're trying to get better, you're trying to beat that next town over, and you sort of have this little pact that if I get into trouble, you're gonna get in trouble with me. And as a young man, I knew it was always important to find people who would back you up. So, back to 1977. A racial incident occurs at the high school, clearly a dividing line between blacks and white students. The reporter goes on to indicate, I'm going to read a couple of excerpts to try and read it to sort of give you a framing of 1977. An incident, as the name-calling incident appears, it sparked a 2-day fight between black and white students that apparently took teachers and administrators by surprise and shocked many white parents in predominantly working class community of 65,000 located just north of Boston. There were some people in 1977 that it didn't take by surprise. There was a director of the West Medford Community Center who had reflected, he had seen the tension between black students and white students. I'm going to read another section of this article. It says, by sharp contrast, most black parents, many of whom attended Medford High School, insisted that they and their children had lived with confrontation between the races on the streets and in the school for years. The only thing that surprised me is that it took so damn long to come out, one black mother said. So the context is, here's this high school of almost 4,000 young people, divided among individuals who feel most comfortable with themselves, and a fight breaks out. A fight that broke out that actually spills out into the courtyards. The police are called, school has to be called off, and the adults in the community realize they have a problem, because they could foresee and they could easily determine if the young people in the high school aren't getting along, we have a bigger problem in our community. And if we don't address that bigger problem, we are going to be a divided community. So, back to 1977 again. Outside the high school, pivotal events are taking place. Because during 1977, there are folks in Medford, the adults, who are now forming their own Medford branch of the NAACP. So the process for the NAACP, for folks who don't know it, if you can get 25 individual people to take out a membership, you can ask the national office to say, you want to be your own separate branch. So that was what was taking place in 1977, that folks, black and white, were joining together to say Medford needed its own NAACP branch. And I sort of done some research of going through some old archive documents of the NAACP. And I want to read off a couple of names of individuals, because many of these individuals are in our community, because what they were doing at the time, I think, was historic. And it was important for them to be able to speak out and say, we need to be better able to speak with each other. Blacks and whites shouldn't be living separate lives in this community. So a part of the founding members of the Medford branch of the NAACP back in 1977 included Wallace Counts, Mayor Michael McGlynn, Reverend Oscar G. Phillips, who was the pastor of Shiloh Baptist Church. And there's another woman, and I'm afraid I don't recall her, but her name is Carol Adams. Carol Adams was the wife of Reverend Eugene Adams, who was a longtime civil rights activist and who was the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Church in Medford. Carol is an important person in the history of this position because back in 1977, the city council, like many cities and towns, had passed an ordinance that they wanted to have an affirmative action program. An affirmative action program, I'm going to be a little bit loyally here, it was a program to remedy past discrimination, that they were going to go out of their way to make sure more people of color were integrated into City Hall and into the lifeblood of local government. Carol Adams was the first affirmative action officer for the city of Medford. And for those of you who attended Monday's MLK event, Ms. Adams unfortunately just recently passed away this past December, but there are important key individuals in our community that stood up and said they wanted to make a difference. I know I'm spending a lot of time on 1977, and I will actually get to my job of the Director of Diversity Inclusion. But again, I'm trying to give you the framework, what's happening, and my thoughts as a young man back at that time. This article also, back in from 1977, talks about an incident that I clearly remember as a young man in Medford. Black community leaders attribute much of the increase in tension between the races to a stabbing death last January of Brian Nelson, 18 of Arlington Street in West Medford, a black Medford High School student. Brian Nelson was the older brother of a close classmate of mine. Now, my recollection of the time, there was a white van that somehow was in West Medford, an altercation occurred, that other individual had a knife, and Brian Nelson lost his life. As a teenager, it makes you aware about your surroundings when you can be in your neighborhood and lose your life over an altercation. And I'm affected because it's my friend. My friend no longer has his brother. So what it means to me and many of my friends is we need protection in this community. We need to be with one another and help each other out no matter where we are. And it's, well, over time, I learned that the individual that did this violent act didn't live in Medford. He was a white man from Charlestown, and he was tried, and if my recollection will serve me, he served time for that act. But as a teenager, it doesn't matter. It means that there's a group of people out there who may not like you for who you are, and I'm not planning to go anywhere. I'm gonna get by the best I can, and you get by joining in alliances with people who will help and protect you. Now, I spent a lot of time in 1977 for a reason, because unfortunately, for some of you who've been in Medford for a while, racial fights at the high school, the one-off, the 1977 wasn't a one-off. It wasn't okay, we've had tensions and we've learned how to resolve it. Because in 1992, now I'll sort of fast forward you past my graduating Medford High School, going to UMass Amherst, graduating, going to a graduate degree at UMass Amherst in labor relations, and now after 2 years of a master's degree, I figured, you know what, I need a law degree. I'm in Suffolk Law School, earning my law degree, living at home with my parents, save a lot of money that way. But a fight at Medford High School, 1992, and it's the same story. An altercation between individuals, black against white. The police are called in, the state police are called in, helicopters come. Some people will recall sort of the aftermath, that the police department was criticized heavily about how they responded. I even had the opportunity this morning to chat with Gwen Blackburn. She is a longtime member of this community and who was a guidance counselor back in 1977, and it was also still around back in 1992. And she recalled how when the police were called in to break up a fight, she was screaming at a police officer to get off this young man because the young man couldn't breathe. He was being choked. And the officer was dismissive to her and like, you know what, if you want to interfere with me, maybe you will be arrested. So again, I'm sharing a little bit of the context, a little bit of the struggle in the moment, but I want to frame that we didn't solve the problem. Tensions continued to be created because people weren't talking with each other. They hadn't learned the skills of how we work out our differences, how we can be different but yet still together. Silos of individuals who were comfortable with each other got into a fight, it escalates, and it got ugly, unfortunately. But it can get better. It will get better. I'm standing here before you saying, I think I am paid by the city of Medford to make sure those sort of events don't take place. Now imagine me, the audacity to stand up in front of a public room and try and say I can prevent a riot, a dividing line between individuals. I probably can't, but what I can do is be out there in the community, talking about issues, finding ways for people to talk to one another. I am so proud, happy to be even speaking with all of you. This is a part of the process that we are talking with each other. We are going to learn to get over differences, be even challenged by differences to say, I may not agree with you, but I want to understand where you're coming from. And it becomes my job to be that bridge. Because I've grown up in Medford, because of the education that I've earned, because of the different organizations that I've been involved with, I've been able to create some really good, strong relationships. I believe part of the relationships that I was able to create over the many years, being in the role of the president for the Mystic Valley branch of the NAACP for 10 years, helped give me the skills that will hopefully prevent this sort of activity happening in Medford. There'll be no quantifiable way for me to say, oh, because Neil spoke on Thursday night at the Medford Public Library that we avoided something tomorrow. Probably not. But that's okay. For me, it is continuing to build relationships with organization and individuals and fostering more and more communication. So I am honored and privileged to be in this role. Don't tell anyone I would have done this for nothing. I've been doing it for a while. But for me right now, it is sort of the sweet spot where I can be out working in the community to do things that bring people together as opposed to tear them apart. Some of the handouts I've given you, I've simply provided it as a little bit of a context. One of the sheets includes the demographics of teachers at the high school compared to its population. I see that as almost a tragedy. One of the numbers indicates that between 2014 and 2015, the high school may have one African-American teacher. I want to say I'm here to try and find a way to find more teachers of color to come into our school system, to be out there promoting, to be out there encouraging, to be working with staff. We have the opportunity where there's a new superintendent who will be hired for our school system, and finding the right individual who will take that as a high priority. Because I'm fearful that without teachers of color better positioned in that high school, that we don't connect with those young people in our community. And the demographics of our high school are the demographics of our population. And I want to be part of that solution. So I just simply shared that as one of my highest goals in this role, is to remedy the let's just call it the lack of enough teachers of color. I think, and it's not just for the students of color or the black students. I think having more teachers of color enriches every student. And I think it's an important criteria that we need to consider moving forward as we teach our young people in our public schools. I've also brought along